I'm Ruben Pillay. I work at the ICCROM, which is the National Centre for Restoration and Research in Paris. It's housed within the Louvre Museum, but it's a national centre which handles the restoration for all of the museums in France. So we have a large collection of samples which date back to we started in the 1960s, about 40,000 samples collected from works of art from various museums around Paris. And we also have reference collections of pigments and other materials that we hold. So my involvement, well, amongst other things, my work involves creating data systems and databases to manage the kind of data we produce at the ICCROM, so imaging and also data on these samples as well as other things. So we have in place a system to manage our samples and to be able to try to link these samples to other kinds of information related to the works of art, things like this. So yeah, so this kind of initiative from ICCROM is perfectly timed for us as we are actively involved in it. Thank you. Antonio.
Morning, everyone. So my name is Antonio Candeias. So I'm a researcher at HERCULES Laboratory, and I coordinate a share in sustainable heritage. And so samples are part of my daily work, as a matter of fact. At HERCULES Lab, this is the thing that we need, and that's also one of my interests. We need, in fact, to create an archive, because at the moment we have a huge amount of samples, but we don't really have an archive. So it is really extremely important to start organizing things and start to put in value the samples of our activity. So HERCULES Lab started in 2009. And a thing that at the beginning was not really an issue, now it starts to be an issue. And so this is one of my experiences regarding sampling and samples, future sample archives at our research lab. But in fact, I was also in the past director of the National Lab for Conservation Restoration for central government in Portugal. And that lab specifically initiated its activities in 1940, and it has a sample archive that dates back to 1940, which is a huge amount of samples, a huge amount of reports from the intervention, the conservation restoration interventions. And in fact, what I think is that this national archive, it's in fact, it has a huge intrinsic value. And it is a testimony of the practices all over all through time, and also of the choices that we made when creating those samples and when doing the conservation restoration interventions. And in fact, the laboratory, when I was director at the laboratory, so the sample archive was really very well organized in terms of physical infrastructure, but there was a thing that it was not really accessible. And so one thing that we did at that time was to put everything digitally, and now it's of course accessible. And there are protocols of access, and this is basically what I wanted to say. These archives, sample archives, are really extremely important, but the policies for access and for management are extremely important.
Thank you, Antonio. Serena.
Hi, everyone. My name is Serena Benelli. I am a PhD candidate of the Politecnico di Milano, and I'm working now on a project related to a sample archive. That's the reason why I'm here. So thank you, ICCROM, thank you, Évora University, for this opportunity, because it is really actual, and it has a big relevance for my work too. I started my PhD on this archive that was created by a sort of pioneer in heritage science conservation. Her name was Antonietta Gallone. She was a physicist, and she collected something like 12,000 samples embedded and not from cultural heritage objects. More of that are from Italian and European collection, public and private. She started this work on the request of the then director of Pinacoteca di Brera, looking to what in that period, in the late 70s, was carried out in Louvre's laboratories. So there was a sort of network, an exchange between people of the field, like we are doing this today. And I think the topicality of this issue is very relevant, and we together could we could enhance this field. I mean, for example, I started my PhD program. I'm working in particular on the Last Supper samples from the mural of Leonardo da Vinci that counts almost 500 samples in the archive. But I was asked to write down a state of art about samples, heritage samples archive, but this is the state of art. So it's fantastic, and thank you again for this opportunity.
Thank you, Serena. And Nigar, you're here behind me. Quite
Yes,
scary.
I look huge. Hi, everyone. Am I audible?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Hi, I'm Nigar Sheikh. I am the Conservation Laboratory in charge from CEPT University, Ahmedabad in India. This laboratory itself started in 2017, and since then we had a little collection growing of building materials from heritage buildings, historic buildings. These are all traditional building materials, which are mortars, plaster samples, brick samples, stone samples. This collection started as a teaching collection for educational purpose, to demonstrate students how the building materials are and how they have a different composition of different historic structures. These structures are 200-year-old, some are 500-year-old, and in and around Ahmedabad city, and now in the entire, we have collection from the entire state. With this collection growing, we found a need to now start archiving the samples, since some of the samples are very unique in itself and come from structures which no longer exist now. So they are the only evidence from the structure. And now we started to have a need to archive these samples, as they are very important, and they can be a unique repository in itself in the future for reference of what the structure was. And they can also be used. There is a lot of research potential when it comes to making a compatible repair material with the original material that was used in the historic structures. So that's when we started having an urge to archive these samples. And this is an initiative that has been helping us to since yesterday's discussion, to get correct questions, to ask the right questions and move in a direction that we organize our samples properly. We had a digitization system, but to even organize that properly, what information is required, how to give access, to have a proper policy and ethics behind it. So this is the need for our collection. And since this collection is growing, every year we are adding more and more samples. There's a huge need to archive it properly and digitize all the information that we are collecting. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nigar. All right, let's try and pick these two things apart: communicating value and enhancing use, in our remaining 30 minutes. Communicating value. Could you start us off, if you don't mind? Just can you talk a little bit about what you and the Library of Congress are kind of doing so far to communicate value? And you can answer that in any way you want, whether it's senior management, the public, whatever. What's sort of going on so far?
So one thing that struck me yesterday when someone reported out was giving the archive a name, and I'd inherited a name that was rather boring. few years, I decided I'd call it CHARM because, you know, our European colleagues always have fantastic acronyms. I'm like, why can't I have one that sounds really cool? So the Centre for Heritage Analytical Reference Materials, I wanted to take it away from samples specifically and to add the materials. So I think in terms of the value, people have started to recognize, we started with the Barrow book collection. For those of you who know, it's from 1,000 books from 1500 to 1900, which sort of disappeared, and then suddenly we found it, and we won't say quite where, but it's become particularly relevant within the library and externally that people are understanding the use and the need to have these materials to test, as Nigar just said, to test treatments, to use for training, to share with people so that we can compare results. And it's become, you know, upper management recognized, even though we're struggling with some of the support, to be honest, they've recognized that it's quite innovative what we're trying to do with the data platform. So we have the physical, which is called CHARM. The digital is called CHARMD, CHARMD, and that's where we're linking all of the analytical results to the specific sample. So in terms of the value, I think it's becoming recognized that it is its own collection, and it enhances value, and it starts to, I think, showcase a lot of the work we're doing in the labs and the work that we're all doing.
Thank you. Reuben, can I ask you the same question? If you remember the question. That's right.
How are we communicating value?
Yeah,
So,
how is the CITROM communicating
well,
value?
yeah, until now, the CITROM has really communicated the value of these collections through its publications, through its scientific research, through catalogs, through these kind of media. But we have an initiative now to try to put this online for the public as well. So we are looking to communicate the value, you know, much more directly to the general public and to other specialists in the field. So yeah, to answer the question, it's not something we've really addressed apart from through specific projects and articles and journals. So it's something we need to address. We need to start defining the value of our collection and trying to communicate. So it's something that we're only really starting.
Great. I'll put this question to one more person. Nigar, perhaps I could ask you the same question. How you are, the sort of things you're doing so far to communicate value. It's really hard to want to look at you when I'm talking.
Yeah, so basically the lab is connected directly to the Masters of Conservation and Regeneration course in the university. So as far as students and the major custodians of the samples, the values are directly connected, and you know, we test every year, they get to know. And we also conduct a lot of capacity building courses around the collection. So, you know, how to test building materials. We are looking forward to conduct more such courses. So right now, as far as teaching and educational values and how to create awareness around the sample to these sectors, we are doing our bit. But we want to now create awareness to other sectors also, other universities, institutes, so that we can connect and collaborate with them within India if there are other such samples, which we are not aware of right now. And we don't know if they have collected such building materials. So we are trying to create now awareness with other universities and with locals. We have, as I said, that we do create a lot of capacity building courses. So we have announcements done around, and we are now thinking of connecting it to our different other initiatives where we can, you know, talk about what sample collection we have, and we showcase it on our platform, social media, to create that awareness. Internally, there is an awareness. Administration knows about the collection, and we have been talking about the collections for the past 2 years with them. So right now, the internal awareness and communication is smooth. But externally, this is one of our initiatives where we want to create more awareness apart from the teaching sector.
Fantastic, thank you. I'll sort of expand that question slightly to the other three panelists. So Adrian, you first. I mean, you can talk about that if you like, but it's more about reflecting on the first 2 days. Talk a bit about what you've learned about what could become effective ways of communicating value that perhaps you may not do already.
Okay, thank you, Tom. one of the things, I mean, by chance, if you look at the name of this meeting here in this project, Connecting Collections, what we've all been doing here and what the essence maybe of what we're trying to do is actually collecting connections. So if we turn that around and then look at, we have these resources, these physical resources, we also have the data and the knowledge that we've collected from the resources, but they also have tremendous potential. So I think what we've seen here in the discussions is that we know we need to safeguard these for the future, but we also need that there's some sort of potential in these resources. Like we have the actuality of what they offer us and what they've offered us in the past, but we have a lot of potential for the future. And part of that, had a very interesting chat with Fenella's colleague, Andrew Forsberg, just about this notion of when data becomes knowledge, and somehow about allowing others to share your data and share your knowledge, of course, but share your data from your collection. And therefore, by linking people and these activities, some sort of synergistic value that might come out of that. Producing more knowledge.
Very nice. Collecting connections, of course. Now, none of us is going to remember the actual
I know,
title, but very nice. I liked it. Serena, could you answer that question? Sort of what you're doing already in your very extraordinary collection, but also perhaps things you've sort of things that have struck you as being particularly helpful in the 2 days.
Yeah, I particularly agree with the point of view of Adrian. So thank you for expressing that concept. I think that we have a huge resource for future. For future in particular, I'm speaking in particular for the for what concern cultural heritage samples archive for research in the field of conservation. But I think that each of this archive could provide the progress, the evolution of the studies in sense of education, in sense of scientific research, and also to leave a sort of legacy of the past, of the policies, of the how some people do some works and job, the methodologies of the past to improve them, and during the time passing, I mean, science and technologies are so fast, so we can try to adapt our collection, our potentiality of with these materials to evaluate which could be the results and what this kind of samples could provide us. I think in particular it's important for cultural heritage samples archives to be linked, for example, with the museums or private or public collection that contain the object of origin. So also to provide more awareness on the theme, to be known more, make people know that for heritage object there is also a smaller part that could be studied in a later stage. I think this could be interesting for each of our archive. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Antonio, so the same question to you, but really interesting what you said at the beginning about the sort of 2 experiences you've had with the sort of big national lab and what you have here. So just maybe as part of your answer to this about where this should be going, if there's a little bit to be said about the sort of different ways or pros and cons of centralizing information or these sort of smaller individual labs.
Well, the thing is that the approaches were completely different in these 2 labs. So the national lab, when was thought in the 1940s, was really as a centralized national laboratory. So, and there was nothing going on in Portugal besides the national laboratory. So, and everything was really thought through, so they really knew what they were doing. Here at our lab was completely different. So we were just researchers working on each one with their own projects, and at some moment, each one of us have a lot of samples, and the laboratory started growing, and at the moment, we have really an issue at our lab, because there is really the samples that we have now for all the projects that we have been working on over the last 15 years. It's really important. It's a source of knowledge, and we have to care for them, and we really have this mission to put this for the community. And this is a thing that we have really to think through and to organize at our lab. But I want also to talk about another experience that we have had with the National Laboratory of Civil Engineering. About 4 or 5 years ago, the National Laboratory of Civil Engineering decided to create an archive of construction materials. Maria João is there, and she was part of this project. And we were involved in this specific archive for historical construction materials. And what is interesting in that is that the archive was thought not only as a physical archive, but mainly as an integrated structure or infrastructure that has a physical archive together with a database with metadata, with geographical information, and everything that was thought since the beginning. And it's really, and of course it has a strategy for communicating to community. So there is a portal, there is several newsletters that are coming out of that. And this can be, in fact, the way it is that, so the archive has its intrinsic value, but then by communicating to it, you can really be drivers for innovation and for research. That's it.
To say one of the hardest things about chairing these panels that everyone says interesting things. I want to kind of follow up on things, but we can't. But I would like, I mean, panelists, please do respond or jump into anything. If anyone here would like to respond to anything you've just heard from someone else, Fenella, you've been scribbling things down, so I suspect you do.
I think, you know, in terms of communicating value, in terms of reflecting, I feel like a lot of the discussions were about the knowledge that was contained within the sample archives. We weren't really thinking about the potential knowledge. And I think we've got a huge potential for what's there if we can connect, if we can show the extra value that's embedded. And I feel that that's something that could really help us move forward if we can show that level.
I mean, just expand that a little bit. An example.
Yeah, so we had this huge reference collection, and I'll be honest, people would sort of go in there and grab something and maybe leave a sticky note in the drawer. Eric took this 2012, and then someone else would say, don't we have this? And after every project, everyone re-looking at the same spreadsheet and recreating a new spreadsheet, they realized that actually cataloging it and having a list of what we had was really useful. So we started using that. We started, then the conservation lab said, oh, you have this stuff, can we borrow that too? I did some presentations. We had external people donate materials to us. So I feel that also showing that then we can use it. A lot of people talk about using it for training and new techniques. And so I think we're not valuing enough what we have there and the potentiality. And I think that would help us, particularly in terms of funding into management, to show why this is so important. This is why we're actually talking about not just shoving it in drawers and maybe looking at it.
No, absolutely. Nigar, are you able to follow the conversation okay? It's always, I never know whether you're able to hear everything and
Yes, I'm following. Thank you.
can I mean, let's just park value to the communicating value to the side and think a bit about enhancing use. They are obviously so intertwined. Not ask each of you, but I think the two things that I've scribbled down here is to think a little bit about the sort of dream scenarios. If resources were not an issue, what would this look like in terms of enhancing use? And then perhaps finish up with some more sort of lower hanging fruit, sort of specific, smaller things that we could do. Nigar, can I get you to start us off? Do you have a sense of what you know, let's start with the dream scenario, that big picture. What can it sort of
yeah. So the main vision is the archive is recognized globally, and people know that this archive exists and what kind of materials are there, with all the details, having a meta database that is accessible to people who want to access from around the world, not just the university students or from India, but it can be accessed to everyone who wants to know the data. And the major part is the research part also. So we envision that we have researched on these samples, we have done tests that are useful in future. So if in like next few years someone wants to restore a historic building and we have the sample, they have the data also about that sample, that okay, they need to have these kind of repair materials which are compatible to the original material which we already have the sample of. So this is the vision which we have and which we are working to achieve now. So if we have all the resources, all the storage, because storage is an important criteria for us right now. Being a new young lab, we need to have a proper storage for all these growing samples, because there's a lot of sample collection of building materials. There are many structures. Ahmedabad being the world historic city, we have potential of the lab growing enormously with years. So storage, if we have the resources, then we have storage in a way we envision to be recognized globally and have a proper research behind it with all the samples.
Thank you. I'm going to pass back to you again, Reuben. Seems to be someone who just helps out and makes things better, and so just, I mean, that might be completely wrong, but I have this lovely image of you doing that. So we can stay with that. What would your sort of vision of C2RMF and extraordinary ability that could bring?
Yeah, I think many of our institutions are moving in the same kind of direction. People have already mentioned linking sample data to analytical data, linking these information sources, other information sources such as the collection management systems in the museum. And I think in order to enhance use, we really need to continue in this direction and create a more holistic kind of, instead of a reference list or a spreadsheet, but some sort of knowledge repository. So linking these diverse sources together can really help create new knowledge. It's this idea of potential new knowledge. So, my vision really is along those lines. It's enriching already the sample repositories themselves and interlinking these, making sure the analytical data is all there. Analytical data can be used, can be understood. So not just necessarily the files or PDFs and things, but the real data. So this can be reused and analyzed. And I think this is kind of the holy grail we're all kind of leading to. So what we've done is we've kind of started on this kind of road, and sometimes it's been difficult to get going. Not just because of the technology, but also because you need buy-in from people using the systems, from management, and the whole institution. So we started putting our sample collection into our database systems and trying to link it to analytical data many years ago. But it was maybe too early when we started. So the whole project has been rebooted recently, and now there's really momentum from all levels within the C2RMF to kind of move forward with this. So I think it's the right moment to kind of try to achieve these dream scenarios. So the other part of your kind of questions, what the practical. So sometimes creating these dream scenarios can seem daunting. It's like a huge project that may require huge resources. The way to go about this is really to break it down into tiny pieces. A lot of what we need to do has already been done in terms of software development, in terms of how to organize data. So it's an incremental process. If we want this to be a sustainable, long-term thing, we need to do it incrementally and build upon what's already there, not try to revolutionize what's already in our institutions, but to improve bit by bit. Because we need to, these things need to be able to last and to be sustainable over decades. And often people will put in a new system, and within 5 years or something, it's obsolete. So we need to really look at really long-term sustainability issues for software systems, for also how people enter data, to make sure this is easy to use. This is something that people want to do. You can have the best database system in the world, but unless people want to use it, you're not going to enter anything. So there are all these kind of issues that need to work together. So and we kind of so we rebooted our sample archive project. We're aiming to put it all online next year sometime. So it will start out relatively simply, and then we'll add in the bits to make sure the analytical data is there, the images are all interlinked to our collection management thing. And, so this is kind of the dream scenario.
Yeah, we might come back to that at the very end. Part of what you just said there has triggered something in my mind. Serena, when I pass it down to you in terms of your specific collection, which it's so extraordinary because of the relation to the Last Supper, and it feels like people know about this. It's an easy thing to talk about. But do you have ideas of how you would like to see the enhanced use of the archive?
Yeah. So for the Last Supper collection in particular, we are managing to do to enhance the value of this collection, to do other and new analysis on the same samples. For example, with the collaboration of the National Council of Research. Here there is Antonio Sansonetti that is collaborating with us, and we hope to move some steps in advance with this kind of analysis, and to use also this experience like a sample, a model to new similar experience, so to promote this kind of approach, even to avoid the oversampling as we discussed in the last days, and because this is a so precious material, but there is often the problem of recognition, even if we are talking about the Last Supper. This is still a kind of material that is not so known by people, by community. We have not a complete recognition, and I think that networking together with this kind of initiative, so presenting not my only archive, but my archive, I mean, it is not mine, unfortunately. I'm working on it as part of a larger group that has got so precious, so important collections. Maybe we could try to get more, budget, human resources to do complete work, as for example, for the ICCROM Mora collection has been done, and to improve the collection, improve the archive, improve the accessibility of the archive itself. I don't know if I have answered.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Antonio, so thinking about the lab here, and you said that there is a need to kind of get the information together, manage it, etc. I mean, having just heard Ruben talk about CTROM doing something and reinvigorate its projects. Do you think you'll do something within Hercules sort of isolated, or is it time to really think about sort of trying to connect to other existing databases or systems where they could become more easily linkable?
No, definitely. So the first step was, in fact, the participation in this project with LANEC for the historical samples, for construction historical samples, because at that point we decided to also participate in that physical archive that LANEC, by providing also some of our samples to that specific archive. But we really have to do it inside our lab. So we acknowledge that we had the problem, and now we are going to push forward to create our own archive. But I want to go to that first question that you asked, what was the ideal scenario? And as I think, so a sample has, of course, a symbolic value by itself, but it also is a source of knowledge of a specific item or a specific object or collection. And an archive of samples which were collected over time and with different purposes, of course, has a much higher value, since it can potentiate integrated research that is different from the initial purpose for which the samples were collected. And this is extremely important. It's the fact that by having these samples organized and by having this archive accessible, we can really drive new research that is completely different than the research that was done isolated and that created initially those samples. But the ideal for me, of course, is not having an archive, but is having a network of sample archives and data, as you said, which is extremely important. That, of course, is the dream. The dream should be that each one of us with different archives, if we could manage to have those integrated so that anyone could just search and see what can be helpful. For instance, I'm working on Islamic ceramics, and I know that I can find samples of these ceramics all over different labs, and I can start cooperation, new research projects, collaborative projects, and I think this is the way. The way should be collaborative research and finding out where we could do this research that is more holistic in terms of the samples that we can get by doing our own research. So I would say that a network of sample archives and data should be the way. So to start putting the institutions working together and starting to create a real platform. And for that, I think that the first step would be the registration of the sample archives at ICCROM. And then going forward, this could be the first step, and then going forward to really create this space.
Thank you, Antonio. We're running out of time, but I do want to make this very, very fair with questions going to people. Adrian, so reflecting on the day so far, and feel free to talk about big picture, dream vision, or sort of down to earth, lower hanging fruits. What are your takeaways of enhancing use of the collections archives?
I'm so pleased you said that, enhancing use, because a while back you said parking value, and I think that's really important too, because going from the real world, which Fenella and Ruben, Serena, and Antonio have been speaking about, to a conceptual understanding of what do we think we want to share? What is it that we have as this resource? And if we talk about enhancing values, perhaps we're saying this is what we think we have and this is what we think we need to safeguard. Whereas we know, all of us, I think, that values aren't universal and that values change. So if we turn that around a little bit and we start to think about functionalities, and we think about the potential functions, the past functions, the present functions, functionality, use, as you said, enhancing use, I think that's the way to go. And I think that's what we're going to talk about today in the session today. And if we're thinking about usage, then maybe we're underusing our thing, and that's different to thinking about values or sharing values. So I think that that sort of intellectual conceptual change, which is a problem in conservation theory because we've been wrapped up in these values, and values are important, but they're changing and they are depending on your horizon and your experience and your historical setting, of course, your context. So I have a feeling that once we start to think about functionality, we think about what is this stuff, and we're thinking about the physical attributes of the stuff we have. We're thinking about the physical attributes of the generated documentation. And then we're thinking about all of these tangible, intangible values that emerge from knowledge and emerge from exchanging these things. So I just think it's a reset so that we don't get bogged down on what we already know, because that's the whole thing of a sample and its connection with its host object or context, is all of this potential information learning that we can have as students.
Fenella, I'm going to come back to you. My last question, but I think we have a little bit of time for some other comments if needed. And I mean, it's the same question, but perhaps specifically some of the things that are emerging, that there are these bigger institutions with resources who have established collections, and they're all the way down to very, very tiny things. And when I first sort of started thinking about this ICCROM project, I had this vision in my mind of something like an interlibrary loan system. It may be completely unworkable, completely irrelevant, but given you work at one of the fairly major libraries, and the major library, is there a model there, vision-wise, where it may require the large institutions to become these sort of repositories or hubs to make sure the collections are together and are archived where there simply is not possible in other places, or this ability to kind of share information or even samples? Does that sort of feed into your vision of where this could go?
Yeah, I'm very aware of the privilege of being where I am, and I very much don't want to say the library says this, but I'm also becoming aware of the fact that the lack of resources at small institutions means that people just cannot look after their collections. And so I have finally got my director to agree that if someone cannot, that we will agree to take that and house it for them, and it will remain named for them. To your point about connecting, and I'm going to sneak in sort of a dream scenario, I'm going to going back to Ruben and I have been having some discussions over the years, and coming back to the really practical of how do we move this forward? I mean, there's people who know me, it's like, can we just move the boxes and just do something? So I think my dream scenario, no one knows what we've got, right? That's our big problem. Let's get it online. And even if it's a simple registry that describes just what we have, I have 100 paint samples, I have blah, I think getting that online is the first step. The second one for me is searchable metadata. We can have it online, but if I can't read what someone says green and someone says verdigris and someone says pigment and someone says colorant, but it's actually all the same thing, we need to collectively agree on an approach and some standardized terminology. And perhaps the first step that is, instead of us spending 10 years trying to be perfect, let's get version 1 out there and agree for what the top level material descriptor will be. And let's move forward. And then we can say, oops, let's just make that 1.2 because we didn't quite add in that bit. I think step 3 is connecting and expanding, as you're saying. Until we can actually show that value and connect, then we can't really prove to our colleagues, to the public, to our management that this is really important and is being used. And I think that I'm trying to read my terrible writing and I didn't wear my glasses. The raw data is critical as the next step, but I think back to Ruben's points, let's not try and do all of it now. If we can get the descriptive of what we've got out there, now we can then pick out each piece, and maybe each of us takes a specific instrument, and we're working through how we actually extract off that one. And then perhaps one of the things that we can do is as part of that, we show a cross-sample connected project that adds value. So circling back to what you originally asked me, I think us as larger institutions, we can leverage what we've got and we can move forward and we can engage with smaller institutions to make sure that we're robust enough to have involved in the process and the platform and everything what they need. And we work together, and hopefully the Milan, with its new focus on social justice, will just jump right in.
Thank you. We couldn't have a panel without saying social justice, so thank you for bringing that in. We're kind of out of time. Should we wrap up? Is that a good place to leave? I mean, it feels like that was a fantastic conversation, everybody. Thank you very much, especially you, Nigar, for staying engaged. It's like you're just there. It's great. And I think that's lots of food for thought for today's discussion. So thanks, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Tom, for so expertly moderating that conversation. And thank you very much indeed to everyone who took part. I think in a way that conversation has just brilliantly set us up for what we're going to be focusing on today. And so before we all break for the coffee, I just wanted to just run through very quickly what we're going to be talking about today and what our finishing line should look like, since this is our last day. Okay, so today, again, pretty packed. We have three main topics here for us to think about. So essentially, very much picking up from what we've just been listening to, this issue of connecting data through shared platforms, you know, really starting to think a little bit ahead and dream about what we can actually start to do to enhance the use and get more out of these resources. The next one leading on from that, of course, is you connect things in order to be able to do something with it. And I was thinking very much while listening to that conversation in a way, you know, laboratories and archives don't collaborate, people collaborate. Yeah, so it really, that is a big part of the connecting, I think, and I think that was very much touched on. So we want to start looking about, like, you know, research opportunities. How can you actually enhance those? And I think very much Antonio was touching on that in his comments about integrated research. And then finally, just finishing up the day with just a bit of dreaming. You know, what is the future vision for these resources? But, you know, more concretely, you know, what is an achievable and sustainable vision for us? So again, we have a number of questions. You don't have to slog through all of them. You know, if your group wants to just really drill down into something in particular, that's also okay, right? But we just put these up here so that, you know, it would get the conversations going. So in terms of the connected data, it's like really what would be an achievable goal for Heritage Sample Archive data sharing by 2030, let's say, by the end of this decade? Because you, Reuven, were saying there are small incremental things that we can start doing. Well, what are they? You know, can we actually identify a couple of those? And, you know, in terms of what opportunities already exist, also, Reuven, you mentioned that there's an awful lot of stuff there that's been done that we could be using, you know, that could help us get further forward. And so then the task for that is, can we come to developing some kind of a strategy for working through at least a few of those steps? With regards to research opportunities, you know, what are the key research areas we'd like to explore through these resources? Are there particular ones where perhaps we can start doing more integrated research? And what will be good ways to enhance this contribution? And here we were really asking about considering the physical, the digital, and the human aspects. You know, what do we need to do? So again, a strategy to unlock research opportunities using these archives. And then finally, a future vision. So yeah, the world is changing very fast, and, you know, we have to think about the future again. Let's pin it on, say, 2030. You know, and what key changes do we think might actually affect this operating environment? You know, what things should we be thinking about? Planning ahead, you know, good things perhaps, but maybe some not so good things. Perhaps we need to do a bit of risk management there. But ultimately, what would a future vision look like? And what do we need to start doing now to actually make that achievable and sustainable? So a vision for Heritage Samples Archives in 2030 and an action plan, please, by the end of today. So it's not a big ask, come on. Again, we have a plenary feedback session at 4:30, so it's very much like yesterday, you know, finishing line 4:30. We'll see if we get there. and lots of coffee and food in between to keep you going. So I think we all need to break now for coffee, and thank you very much. Oh God, yeah, sorry, excuse me. These are the groups for today. So yeah, take a note of which group, which number, and we will meet again later.